This is a historic day. I cannot hear you very well, but what I can tell you is that this is a historic day for Cuba. This is the day that could change the future of Cuba, and that will certainly change or start the change of the relations between Cuba and the US. The US has imposed an economic embargo onto Cuba for 60 years, and this is the day when, apparently in an hour's time, we know that President Obama will announce that the US administration is ready to start talks with the Cuban government to reestablish relations between the two countries. And this announcement today, as I said before, could absolutely change the future of Cuba. The day started with the announcement that the Cuban government was releasing a US prisoner in Cuba. Alan Gross had been in prison in Cuba for 5 years. He had been sentenced in Cuba for 15 years for conspiring against the Cuban state. And let's remind our viewers that all he did was he brought into the country satellite communications for the Jewish community, and he was in prison for 15 years. He has been released today. We know that he's on his way to the US, and we know that the Obama administration and the Raúl Castro administration in Cuba have talked. This has now been reported that apparently Raúl Castro and Obama spoke an hour on the phone yesterday, and of course this is groundbreaking. This is something that had not happened, and this just shows you the commitment between the two countries to start a process of reestablishing relations. So what President Obama will announce today, as far as we understand, and then President Raúl Castro will also make a speech in about an hour's time, and we will update you with what they have to say, is that they will announce some new measures that will improve communications and relations between the two countries. So we can certainly see a move towards reestablishing relations between the two countries, and that would mean talks, that would mean possibly opening an embassy in Havana, that would mean, according to the Obama administration, that they will start to see whether Cuba can be taken out of the list of countries that sponsor terrorism, and that is something that Cuba had asked before. Apparently, for what we know now, the Cuban government has also agreed to release all the prisoners of conscience in Cuba, some 53 prisoners in Cuba. And as well, the Obama administration has agreed to free and return to Cuba 3 Cubans that had been convicted of spying in the US and that were in prison with long prison sentences in the US. We've also heard that they're coming back to Cuba. So this is the day that will change the future of the island. Remember, Cuba and the US have been enemies, since the 1959 Communist Revolution and Fidel Castro came to power, and they've been long-standing enemies. And this is a day when we are seeing from both governments an initial thought, an initial intention of re-establishing relations between the two countries.
And that is at government level. It is truly significant. Just give us an idea on a day-to-day level for ordinary Cubans, the many Cubans who live in America, how much of a difference this will make?
Look, I think in Cuba this news will be welcomed. I think this announcement today absolutely undermines the US trade embargo that has been imposed since 1960, even though the Obama administration cannot lift the embargo because it's law and it would have to be passed by the Congress. It definitely undermines the embargo, and that is something that not just the Cuban government but the Cuban people have been wanting. Also here in Miami, the Cuban exile community has been changing. We don't see anymore, most of the people here wanting to strengthen the sanctions against Cuba, but we'll certainly see the two opinions. We'll see some people that will feel that this isn't the right step, that the US should actually strengthen the embargo and the sanctions against Cuba so that Cuba makes some changes towards democracy. But we will see other people and other lines of thoughts saying, well, you know what, actually that hasn't worked. And that is what the Obama administration is acknowledging today, that those sanctions have not worked. Cuba is a country where freedom of expression is not allowed. There is only one party, which is the party in power, the Communist Party, so you're not allowed to express yourself freely. But I think these measures today will start a movement of openness in Cuba, and I think this will be a start of change in Cuba.